There's a version of me that wants to respond, wants to explain, wants to drag receipts into the light, wants to say, this is what really happened. But I had to force myself and stay silent, because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is open your mouth too soon in a season God designed to be quiet. See, I learned that silence is not weakness, it's strategy. You're not being passive. You're being positioned. God said, if you'll be quiet, I'll speak louder through your fruit than you ever could with your voice. And I know how hard it is to stay still when everything in you is screaming. Defend yourself, but hear me every time you talk. When God told you to hush, you risk losing the lesson in the noise. You gotta force yourself and stay silent, because the battle you're fighting, it's not yours, it's his. And he doesn't need your commentary, he needs your trust. He doesn't need your comeback. He needs your commitment. You keep saying, God, elevate me. But elevation requires discipline. It requires the maturity to walk past messy, walk past petty, walk past misunderstanding without explaining a thing. Because when you're really healed, you don't have to prove you're healed. You just live it quietly, confidently, consistently. Let the silence teach. Let the silence build. Let the silence protect you from a version of yourself that used to pop off, that used to need attention, that used to need validation. Sometimes God will close your mouth because he's working on your heart. So I dare you right now to force yourself and stay silent. Let the fire burn in the secret place. Let the oil flow in the unseen. Because when you finally speak, it won't be for defense, it'll be with authority. And they'll know she's been with God. She's been growing in the silence. You ever been in a place where everything in you wanted to respond? Somebody lied on you. Somebody twisted the truth. Somebody mistook your kindness for weakness and played with your name like they forgot you were chosen. And there you are, sitting in the tension between what you could say and what God is calling you to hold back. Let's be real, silence is not natural. Silence is not always easy. We've been trained to defend, to react, to protect our peace with volume and vengeance. We're told, don't let anyone walk over you. Speak your truth. Stand your ground, and yes, there's a time for that. But what do you do when God says, this is not the moment to speak. This is the moment to submit. Silence doesn't mean you're scared. Silence means you've learned the difference between fighting for yourself and letting God fight for you. See, people think silence is a sign that you lost, that you're weak, that you don't have a comeback, that you're not bold enough to respond. But hear me, silence doesn't mean I don't have the words. It means I've mastered the urge to use them when God said, be still. Silence is not giving up, it's growing up. It's spiritual maturity that says, I could say something, but I choose not to, because where I'm going, not everything deserves my voice. Because when you know who you are, you don't argue with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You don't try to correct the whispers. You don't try to chase down the narrative. You don't run after every version of you that somebody else invented. Why? Because silence has a sound, and the sound of silence is power under control. It's grace with a spine. It's fire with restraint. See, there's a version of you that used to need the last word, used to need the platform, used to need to be heard, to be seen, to be right. But when God starts working on your identity, you don't fight for visibility. You don't fight for recognition. You don't need the room to know you were right. Because when you're walking in purpose, silence becomes your weapon, not your weakness. Some of the greatest victories are won in the quiet, not in the courtroom, not in the group chat, not on social media, but in that sacred space where you hold your tongue and let God handle the outcome. Some of us are talking too much and trusting too little. We say we believe God, but we keep explaining ourselves to people who never had the capacity to understand us in the first place. You're over here drafting statements, crafting captions, rehearsing comebacks in your head, and God is saying, I don't need your help defending you. I need your trust to protect you. Sometimes your silence is the most prophetic thing you can offer. Not because you're weak, but because you've seen what happens when God does it his way. You're not choosing silence because you're scared. You're choosing silence because you've been in the fire before. And you've learned that the fire teaches better than the fight. When Jesus stood before Pilate, accused, lied on, ridiculed, he didn't argue. He didn't plead. He didn't break down. He stood silent, not because he didn't have power, but because he knew who held the power. That kind of silence isn't passive. It's potent. It's the kind of silence that shakes rooms. The kind of silence that speaks louder than shouting ever could. Because when God is working on your behalf, your silence becomes a signal to heaven. I trust you, even when it doesn't make sense, even when it hurts, even when I feel invisible. Silence is not a lack of voice. It's a deliberate withholding of voice until your words can build, not break, until your words can heal, not harm, until your words come from a place of revelation, not reaction. And let's be honest, some of us are tired not because of the fight itself, but because of how much energy we wasted talking about it, talking to people who can't change it, explaining to people who don't care, arguing with people who only showed up to pull you out of character. But when you step into a new level of strength, you realize that not every attack needs a defense. Not every question needs an answer. Not every confrontation needs a response. Silence becomes your discipline. Silence becomes your sanctuary. Silence becomes this sacred space where you and God are the only ones in the room. And he says, good, now I can show you what I've been doing in the dark. You ever tried to help God win a battle? Tried to move some pieces around, tried to speed up his process because it wasn't moving fast enough for your comfort, tried to protect your name, fix the misunderstanding, call the people, clarify the message, cover the mess. And somewhere in the middle of your movement, you heard that still, small voice saying, this one's not yours. Step back. Let me handle it. But stepping back doesn't feel holy. It doesn't feel productive. It doesn't feel powerful. Because we think if we're not fixing it, we're failing. If we're not speaking up, we're being silenced. If we're not controlling it, it's falling apart. But what if God is saying, you're actually delaying what I'm doing because you won't get out of my way? What if your interference is interrupting the divine? You see, God doesn't need your micromanagement. He doesn't need your PR plan. He doesn't need your explanations, your threats, your apologies to people who were never meant to understand your calling anyway. He said, if you could just trust me, if you could just sit still long enough for me to move, if you could just lay your reputation, your pride, your need to be understood at my feet, I'll fight for you in ways your words never could. You ever been in a place where you were so misunderstood it made your chest hurt, so misrepresented that you started doubting your own intentions, and your first instinct was to run in, throw the truth down on the table, and force them to see your heart. But God wouldn't let you. He shut every door where you could speak. He silenced every opportunity to clarify. He blocked you from vindicating yourself because what he was doing wasn't about proving your point. It was about proving his power. There's a kind of pain that comes from restraint, the pain of not defending yourself, the pain of not reacting when you were right, the pain of watching people believe something false about you and knowing you could clear it all up with one conversation, but God whispers, let them talk, let them watch. Let them think what they want, because he's not interested in surface level vindication. He's after something deeper. He's after transformation, humility, strength under control. When God fights, he doesn't fight to shut mouths. He fights to shape hearts. He fights to refine you while revealing them. He fights to build a testimony out of the tension you didn't escape. And if you're always interrupting the process, trying to fix it, manage it, soften the blow, you'll never see the full measure of his glory. Because your hands are where his hands should be. Your words are crowding where his word wants to speak. Your plans are competing with the strategy of heaven. God said, I don't need you to fight dirty when I'm trying to fight holy. You keep swinging, and you're just exhausting yourself. You keep clapping back, and all it's doing is keeping you stuck in cycles. You keep trying to look strong on the outside, and meanwhile, your soul is weary. But when you really trust God, I mean really trust him, you realize that your silence is not powerlessness. It's permission. It's you giving God the green light to go ahead of you and make the crooked places straight. Sometimes he'll delay the clarity so you can depend on his character. Sometimes he'll let them walk away with the wrong version of you in their mouth so he can birth the right version of you in the secret place. You ever wonder why certain things didn't work out until you stopped trying to make them happen? Why certain people didn't apologize until you stopped forcing the conversation? Why certain battles didn't turn until you turned your eyes back to the hills? It's because God doesn't do his best work in chaos. He does it in consecration. And consecration can look like silence. It can look like being misunderstood. It can look like walking away from a fight that your ego wanted, but your spirit knew wasn't worth it. It takes faith to shut up. It takes trust to sit down. It takes spiritual maturity to say, God, I won't touch this. You've got it. Because we think surrender means weakness, but in the kingdom, surrender is strategy. It's the strategy that says, I believe you see what I don't. I believe you hear what I can't. I believe you know how to handle what's beyond me. When you interfere, you get human outcomes. But when you release it, truly release it, God starts working in ways that don't make sense. And the best part, he doesn't just fight the battle. He makes sure you grow from it. He makes sure that while you were trying to prove yourself, he was preparing you. He makes sure that while they were forming weapons, he was forming your next level. Everybody wants the next level. They want the platform. They want the promotion. They want the visibility, the anointing, the breakthrough. They want the more. The calling, the influence, the favor that flows in public. What nobody wants to talk about is the weight that comes with it. The pressure behind the platform, the warfare in the waiting room, the discipline that elevation demands. Because before God elevates you externally, he has to develop you internally. You don't get to skip the inner work and still walk in outer glory. You don't get to hold the microphone if you haven't learned to hold your mouth. Elevation requires internal control, not control of people, not control of situations, but control of yourself. Can you manage your emotions when they mishandle you? Can you silence your ego when your name isn't mentioned? Can you keep your posture when the room tries to pull you back into who you used to be? We think the test for promotion is how gifted we are. But God is not just testing your gift. He's testing your governance. Can you govern your reactions? Can you govern your words? Can you govern your thoughts when everything around you says, you deserve to respond? The old version of you, the broken version, the bruised version, the impulsive version, she would have responded. She would have made a scene. She would have taken it personal, held the grudge, proved the point. But elevation asks you to let her go, to put her down, to bury what's familiar so you can carry what's sacred. There is no elevation without separation. Separation from your old habits. Separation from your emotional triggers. Separation from the desire to be understood by people who were never assigned to understand you in the first place. Because where God is taking you, you cannot afford to live at the mercy of your moods. You cannot afford to let offense sit in your spirit too long. You cannot afford to clap back and lose credibility over something that wasn't even sent to destroy you. It was sent to reveal you. Your response is the real resume. And sometimes God will allow disrespect to surface just to show you that you've grown past the need to retaliate. That's internal control. When they don't invite you and you still show up with grace. When they try to provoke you and you bless them anyway. When you want to speak, but God says, no, your silence is your security. You've got to build an altar where your impulses die. Because if you don't, they'll sabotage your elevation. You'll get to the door and disqualify yourself with your attitude. You'll enter the room and leak unhealed wounds all over the opportunity. You'll be handed the mic and start preaching from your pain instead of your purpose. God is saying, I need you to be rooted before I raise you. Because when you go higher, the air gets thinner. The critics get louder. The stakes get heavier. The enemy gets bolder. And if you're still operating from unhealed places, you'll bleed when they criticize. You'll break when they don't applaud. You'll spiral when they misunderstand your intention. That's why internal control isn't optional. It's essential. It's the difference between influence that crushes you and influence that crowns you. It's the difference between surviving your next level and sustaining it. It's the difference between reacting like who you were and responding like who you're becoming. Because not everything that triggers you is meant to be addressed. Some things are meant to be outgrown. You outgrow the need to defend yourself. You outgrow the pull to be petty. You outgrow the temptation to clap back because you're too focused on clapping for your own healing. You stop proving and start preserving. You stop performing and start protecting the oil God placed on your life. You stop chasing applause and start choosing peace. And it's not because you don't feel it. It's because you've trained yourself not to move off feelings. You've surrendered your emotions to the Spirit. You've placed your reactions under submission. You've learned that stillness doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're wise. God said, I can elevate her now because she won't let one wrong comment unravel her. Because she doesn't need to be seen to stay secure. Because her identity isn't on the line every time her name gets left out of the conversation. Elevation requires internal boundaries. Boundaries around your heart. Boundaries around your thoughts. Boundaries around how much access you give to voices that don't value your purpose. Because internal control isn't just about silence. It's about stewardship. Stewarding your character. Stewarding your capacity. Stewarding your peace like it's sacred ground. Because it is. Silence is not just about keeping your mouth shut. It's not just about holding your tongue when everything in you is screaming to speak. It's not just about withholding words. It's about making room. Room for clarity to rise. Room for divine instruction to echo in the places your distractions have been too loud to let God speak. Sometimes God will quiet your life, strip the noise, separate the crowd, even isolate you, not because he's punishing you, but because he's setting the stage for clarity. There are answers you've been praying for that require a quieter version of you to be received. There are next steps you've been seeking, but they can't arrive in chaos. They can't arrive in rooms filled with opinions. They can't survive the clutter of constant commentary from people who aren't assigned to your future. God said, I want to show you something, but I can't do it in this volume. So he brings you into silence, not a punishment, an invitation to see differently, to feel differently, to discern what's real beyond what's loud. Because when your ears stop listening to people, your heart starts listening to heaven. And when your heart starts listening to heaven, the confusion begins to lift. The dust settles. The pieces that didn't make sense begin to fall into alignment. But it won't happen in the room full of opinions. It won't happen while you're still obsessing over who misunderstood you. It won't happen while you're still trying to win arguments in your mind that God already resolved in the spirit. Silence is a reset. It's the sacred stillness that realigns your soul. It's the place where your flesh finally gets quiet enough to let your spirit speak. You ever wonder why God didn't speak to Elijah in the wind, or in the fire, or in the earthquake, but in the still, small voice? Because clarity doesn't chase crowds. Clarity doesn't compete for attention. Clarity comes when your inner world has been cleared of external noise. And if you've been in a silent season, if God has you in a place where your phone doesn't ring as much, your inbox is quieter, your invitations dried up, your circle got smaller, you may not be abandoned. You may be being positioned to hear what you couldn't hear when you were busy managing other people's expectations. Positioned to receive what you couldn't receive when you were preoccupied with responding to people who weren't qualified to speak into your life anyway. Because silence reveals motives. It shows you who is only attracted to your movement. It shows you who can sit with you even when you're not speaking. It shows you what's still lingering in your soul that's not yet surrendered. There's something about stillness that brings things to the surface. Old pain, unforgiven wounds, hidden pride, all the things that kept you from seeing clearly. You don't realize how cloudy your vision was until the noise dies down, until the spotlight dims, until the applause fades and you're left with the question, what does God want me to see that I've been too distracted to notice? Silence is where God starts pointing at the root instead of the fruit, pointing at the real cause, not just the symptoms, pointing at places you've covered up with success, with service, with busy schedules. But now there's nowhere left to hide. And in that quiet place, he begins to clarify, not just where you're going, but who you are, who you're becoming, who you no longer need to be. Silence gives heaven a chance to rewrite your narrative because you were so busy rehearsing old scripts. Scripts of I'm not enough, scripts of they don't see me, scripts of I have to fight for everything I get. But in the silence, God begins to speak a new story. A story that's not based on striving, but surrender. Not based on proving, but positioning. Not based on reaction, but revelation. And if you could see what God was doing in the quiet, you wouldn't be so quick to fill it with noise. You wouldn't be so quick to text back. You wouldn't be so eager to post the update or force the closure or chase the explanation. You'd understand that silence is not the absence of progress. It's the birthing ground for clarity. You're not being ignored. You're being informed. You're not being silenced. You're being strategically softened so you can hear with fresh ears, so you can move with holy precision, so you can stop making trauma-driven decisions that look like strategy but are really survival. Clarity doesn't shout, it whispers. And sometimes the whisper doesn't come until everything else has been stripped away, until your agenda has been surrendered, until your image doesn't matter more than your integrity, until your ego has been laid down at the altar of obedience, until your dependence on the crowd has been replaced with dependence on the cloud. This is the kind of silence that doesn't numb you. It opens you. Opens your spirit to the God you've been too distracted to hear. Opens your heart to the truth you've been too wounded to face. opens your path to the instruction that doesn't need validation to be obeyed. And now we've come full circle. You thought staying silent was weakness. You thought restraint meant you were losing. You thought silence meant being overlooked, forgotten, dismissed. But God said, no, daughter, your silence is strategy. Because when you force yourself and stay silent, you make space for heaven to move. You give God full access to defend you, shape you, elevate you, and reveal you. You learn that some of your greatest growth will come from what you don't say. That real power is not in your volume, it's in your vision. That healing doesn't always come through confrontation. Sometimes it comes through consecration. You realize that silence isn't you shutting down, it's you rising up from within. It's you choosing purpose over pride, clarity over chaos, obedience over reaction. So stay silent. Not because you're scared, but because you're secured. Not because you don't have words, but because you know that God's word is louder than anything you could ever say. This silence is not the end of your story. It's the start of something sacred. And when God finally speaks, when he finally moves, when he finally reveals what he's been building in the dark, you'll be glad you kept your mouth closed, because what he's about to open, no one can shut.